Hi, my name is Xavier Devroy, and today I will talk about our work on behavioral model seeding for search-based crash reproduction published in open access in the Journal of Software Testing, Verification and Reliability. Okay, so first let's see what is search-based crash reproduction. So when a crash happens in a production environment, the system will usually generate a crash report. So for Java application, this crash report usually includes a stack trace describing how a unhandled exception propagated into the program. So when the issue linked to the crash is forwarded to the developer, they will usually start by trying to understand what happened. And for that, they can try to reproduce the crash. So the error report can help, especially if the user also reported the step that led to the crash, but this is usually not the case. So search-based crash reproduction aims to help developer by generating a test case able to reproduce a crash based on the stack trace provided in an error report. And for that, we use genetic algorithms. Concretely, to generate a test, you need a target class under test. So the first step is to select a target frame in the stack trace for which the algorithm will generate a test case. When executed, the generated test will throw an exception that will propagate it in the same way as in the original stack trace from the deepest frame to the target frame. Once the target frame selected, the genetic algorithm relies on a fitness function to drive the search process. In our case, we use a weighted sum fitness function with three components. The distance to the target line in the target frame. Once the line is reached, the kind of exception that is thrown. And once the right kind of exception is thrown, the similarity between the stack trace generated by the test and the original stack trace. The overall fitness value for a test case ranges from 6 to 0 when the crash is fully reproduced. One of the most important aspects of search-based crash reproduction is for the algorithm to be able to generate objects during the search process. For instance, creating objects on which methods will be called or objects used as parameter values. By default, the search algorithm does this randomly, but a technique called seeding can help here. So the idea of seeding is to use information about the application to help the search process and improve the fitness of the population. So for instance, existing seeding approaches use the source code of the application to collect constants, numerical and string values, and object types, and reuse those during the search. In their test seeding approach, Rojas et al. Use dynamic analysis by executing the existing test to trace the different objects and method called during the execution. This information is then used for cloning and carving. So for cloning, the execution of an existing test is copied and used as an individual for the initial population of a search process. For carving, an object is reused during the initialization of the population and during the mutation of the individuals. The existing technique only uses one resource to collect information for seeding. However, that resource might not be enough to get the full picture of how classes are used in the application. So for instance, test seeding only use the behavior exhibited by the existing test. But of course, if you don't have tests or if the tests are not good enough in your application, you won't have a lot of information, or you will have information of poor quality. So in the case of search-based crash reproduction, it means that if none of the tests exhibits a behavior that is close to the crash, well, the information will misguide the search process. So the goal of model seeding is to abstract the behavior of the software using behavioral models and reuse that abstraction during the search process. So each model is a transition system and represents possible usages of a class, meaning possible sequences of method code on the objects of that class. The main step of our model seeding approach are first the inference of the models, then the selection of abstract behaviors from those models, and finally the concretization of those abstract behaviors into Java objects that can be reused during the search. So we infer the model from call sequences collected from static analysis of the bytecode of the application and from instrumenting and executing the existing tests. Then we use n-gram inference to build the transition system used for model seeding. So n-gram inference takes as input a set of call sequences and builds a transition system where a call depends only on the n-1 previous calls on the object. So a large value of n for the n-gram inference would produce a large transition system with more state and fewer incoming transition, resulting in a more constrained behavior, which would prevent having more diversity in the behavior of the different objects. So in contrast, a smaller value of n enables more diversity in the behavior allowed by the model, requires fewer call sequences to reach the stability of the model, simplifies the inference, and result in a more compact model. So for those different reasons, we use 2-gram inference to build our models. For one version of the system, of course, model inference is a one-time task, which means that afterwards the model can be directly reused for multiple search-based crash reproduction processes. So abstract object behavior are selected from the transition system and concretized to Java objects and stored in an object pool from which the search process can come and pick the object that it needs. So we use dissimilarity as the criteria to select the abstract object behavior in order to improve the exploration of the search-based crash reproduction process. Compared to classical structural coverage criteria trying to cover as many parts of the transition system as possible, diversity tries to increase the dissimilarity between the behavior that are selected. So this is done using a distance measure, which in our case is the Jacquard index. Once selected, each abstract object behavior is concretized to a Java object and stored into an object pool to be used during the search. So for each abstract object behavior, if the constructor is not the first action, one of the constructor of the class is called randomly. Then the methods are called on the newly created object as specified in the abstract object behavior with random parameter values. Due to the randomness, each concretization of an abstract object behavior might be different if it's repeated multiple times. So in our case, the concretization can be also repeated given amount of time. So during the search process, classes are instantiated to create objects during two main steps of the guided genetic algorithm. Guided initialization, where objects are needed to create the initial population of test cases, and guided mutation, where objects might be needed as parameter when a method called is added. So when no seeding is activated, those objects are randomly created by calling the constructor and random method calls. So to preserve the exploration when model seeding is activated, objects can be picked from the object pool during guided initialization, guided mutation, according to two user-defined probabilities, or randomly generated otherwise. So we implemented test seeding and model seeding in Botsing, or crash reproduction framework. So Botsing is open source and available on GitHub, and you can try using it. So we even have a small tutorial for you if you want to see Botsing in action. So for the evaluation, we compare test seeding, model seeding, and no seeding in terms of effectiveness and efficiency. We focus on the effect of model seeding on the initialization of the search process by looking at different probabilities for picking an object during guided initialization. We executed the different configuration of Botsing 30 times on 122 crashes coming from JCrashPack. JCrashPack is a benchmark of Java crashes coming from several open source projects. It comes with an open source execution infrastructure called XRunner that can be used to automatically evaluate crash reproduction tools. Both JCrashPack and XRunner are available openly on GitHub and Zenodo. We used a budget of 62,000 fitness evaluation, which roughly corresponds to 15 minutes execution of Botsing without any seeding, and fixed the population size to 100 individuals. All other configuration parameters are left to their default values, and we also use the default weighted sum scalarization fitness function. To compare the different seeding strategies, we looked at the state of the search process when the budget was exhausted, and the number of fitness evaluation required to reproduce a crash. At the end of its execution, the search process can be in one of the following states. Not started if the initial population could not be generated and the search couldn't start. Line not reached if the line in the target frame could not be reached. Line reached if the target line could be reached but the target exception could not be thrown. Exception thrown if the target line could be reached, the target exception could be thrown, but the stack trace produced is different from the original one. And finally, reproduced when the crash could be reproduced. So let's have a look at the result. In general, test seeding is counterproductive for search-based crash reproduction. It can reproduce fewer crashes and requires on average a higher number of fitness function evaluation to reproduce one. When looking at the statistical analysis, we see that even if test seeding can help for some crashes, it is mostly counterproductive for search-based crash reproduction. We make the same observation for the number of fitness evaluation required to reproduce a crash and for the number of search process that could be properly initialized. This can be explained by different factors. First, for test seeding to be effective, we need a test suite that contains test case with a behavior close to the behavior that we observe in the crash. Such test case can be cloned during the initialization phase and copied in the initial population to help the search. The same observation also applies to objects. If the test cases contain objects with the respective call sequences that are close to the one that can be observed in the crash, those objects can be injected in the individual during guided initialization, guided mutation, and help the search. The third factor points to the challenges of executing the existing tests for test seeding. In our evaluation of test seeding, we considered only tests that are related to the crash, which means that we don't execute all the tests but limit ourselves to the one using a class appearing in the stack trace. But even then, for some crashes, the existing test cases are either expensive in terms of resources and execution time, or challenging to execute in terms of access and security issues. So to summarize, we do not recommend using test seeding for search-based crash reproduction. So concerning model seeding, we see that it can reproduce more crashes than no seeding, and it also requires fewer fitness evaluations. This is confirmed by the statistical analysis, which indicates that model seeding with a probability of 0.5 gives the best results. Model seeding also helps initializing more search processes compared to no seeding for all the different probabilities. This is particularly interesting because for search-based crash reproduction to be able to generate a crash reproducing test, it must first be able to generate an initial population. Looking at the different factors we identified, using dissimilar call sequences to select the abstract object behavior seems particularly useful for the search efficiency compared to test seeding. Indeed, if the number of tests is large, model seeding enables recapturing the behavior of those tests in the model and regenerate a smaller set of dissimilar object behaviors, therefore augmenting the probability to have more diverse objects used during the initialization. We also saw that having multiple sources to generate the models from helps to diversify the call sequences of the objects compared to test seeding. For example, one crash from XWiki could be reproduced only by using the behavior collected from the static analysis of the bytecode. Also, to avoid an explosion of the number of objects in the object pool, we prioritize the classes involved in the stack trace for abstract behavior selection, which means that the object pool contains more objects that are more likely to help reproducing the crash. The last factor points to the limited number of abstract object behaviors selected from the different models. In some cases, the usage model were too large and it was just not possible to cover all of it with only 100 abstract object behaviors selected. So to summarize, model seeding helps search-based crash reproduction despite a small overhead during the initialization to select and concretize abstract object behaviors. A replication package of our empirical evaluation, as well as the result and analysis script, is available on Zenodo. So in conclusion, model seeding helps reproducing more crashes at a smaller cost. So in particular, our results show that behavioral model seeding outperform test seeding and no seeding without any major impact on efficiency. Also, model seeding can significantly increase the initialization rate of 3 crashes when compared to no seeding. We believe that those improvements can be further extended by using other resources like execution log to collect even more behavior of interest for search-based crash reproduction. From the research perspective, by abstracting behavior through models and relying on the advances made by the model-based testing community, we can further improve search-based crash reproduction. The analysis shows that using collected call sequences together with the dissimilar selection and prioritization of abstract object behavior, as well as the combined information coming from static analysis of the bytecode and dynamic analysis of the existing tests, enable more search process to get started and therefore more crashes to be reproduced. So in our future work, we will explore if behavioral model seeding has further implication for the broader area of search-based software testing. And if you want a sneak peek, have a look at our related paper where we apply behavioral model seeding for search-based unit test generation on JSON.